YouTube, my name is Zayan26 and today I'm going to be showing you part 2 of my redstone logic gate tutorial. I'm going to be going from there all the way to the end of this row. If you missed part 1, I covered all the basic logic gates and I did a little bit of demonstration with redstone and how it doesn't work if you point it around the object you're trying to get to. And if you like blowing stuff up, I did blow something up. Okay, first thing on the list is the input stabilizing cell. It's an overcomplicated word for a device that never shuts itself off. No matter how briefly you power it, it just never shuts itself off until you break it. The way this works is it instantly powers this piston, and after one tick, which is the amount of time it minimally takes to flip the switch, it will cause a current and it'll just go in a circle over and over again. And it'll never stop until you break the redstone or the repeater. This is what I call a flash latch. Other people call it a monostable circuit or a pulse generator. The reason I called it a flash latch was because the first time I tried this I had a torch on the end and I was just experimenting with redstone and I figured this out. I thought it should have a name, so I called it a flash latch. Basically what happens is I pull this switch and that piston is going to go up and then it's going to go down after one tick. And the reason for this is because it instantly powers the piston, but after one tick, it powers this piston and puts a solid block here, cutting off the current. It's worth noting if you put glowstone or glass here, nothing's going to happen. It doesn't work with transparent blocks. So the next thing is an input stabilizing cell with a shutoff switch, which is basically a combination of those two. I have an input stabilizing cell here, and a shutoff switch here. That way you don't have to manually break the input stabilizing cell every time you turn it on. Also, you might want to put a button here or something instead of a lever so you don't have to manually turn it back on or turn it off, because otherwise you might accidentally leave it there and then suddenly the piston's only up for as long as you keep it on. And it also has a 1 tick delay as opposed to a no tick delay. It's basically like a little delay switch. The next is an RS-NOR latch, or a memory cell, that has an input and a reset. You don't usually have something on both sides, but I just did this for clarity. Basically what happens is when you push the reset, this piston goes down and that piston goes up at the same time. And you push the reset and it goes back to the way it was originally. Also, the reset and the input can be switched to be either one. It doesn't really matter, both sides are identical. What happens is when you push the button, it turns this torch off and it kills this area, turns the piston off, and turns this torch on. It already powered this area, but then it just unpowers this torch, and then the torch turns on. The next is an RS-NAND Latch. It's basically an RS-NOR latch with a switch on it. It's not really that useful in Minecraft, to be honest, and it's pretty much not worth the effort it takes to build one, since it's a lot more complicated than an RS-NOR latch. You can just look on the Minecraft wiki to figure out what that thing does. This is a clock. Basically what it does is it goes around in a circle and it just keeps going. It incrementally powers on and powers off these different areas, so you could send something off into the distance and power some machine once every couple of ticks. Also, you should never change the settings while it's functioning, because if you do, you'll end up with a input stabilizing cell. Also, some versions of this are inherently unstable, like this version, for example. See, it's just inherently unstable, as opposed to if you do this, where it's a lot more stable. So basically it's just a bunch of repeaters and a string, and you can also hook a bunch of them up to a whole row of repeaters, or you could put two next to each other and put an AND gate, so whenever they converge it powers out, so you get a significantly higher delay than either one could put out individually or together, because they're multiplying each other's times by each other, and that's how long it takes for them to coincide and fire off the signal. This is a piston-based clock. If it looks like a swastika, I apologize for that. And if it doesn't, then I apologize for bringing it up. This is just the simplest version I can build, or that I could come up with. Basically, if you put a solid block here, torch powers a solid block, and it just powers this piston. Also, unlike that clock, you can actually change this one while it's running. You also have to be careful because you might accidentally break something when you're taking it apart, so you want to get the delay up as high as it'll go before you actually remove the piece of dirt. This is a Hoe-Based Switch. I discovered this by accident while I was working on that in survival mode. What happens is when I turn it on and I use a hoe on this piece of dirt, it becomes a transparent block as opposed to a solid one, and the current can't pass through it. It's the equivalent of using a hoe to replace this with a piece of glass. Basically what happens is that gray pixel right there normally has a layer of pixels above it, like it does right now, but when I use the hoe, that layer is gone, so it becomes 15 by 16 instead of 16 by 16, and it's basically the equivalent of putting a glass block there instead of a dirt block. I discovered this by accident. I accidentally made a diamond hoe instead of a diamond shovel. Basically that's what happened. Just stopped working. It took me a while to figure out what happened, but eventually I figured it out. The next thing is a blink device. It's also called a random number generator, although it's not very reliable. To be honest, I've never once seen it turn this torch on after it's turned it off. Once you start running this thing, it seems to prefer these two sides as opposed to the other two. So this piston's only going to go up and down every once in a while. Basically, it's 4 torches with 4 blocks above them, and a piece of redstone right here. See, it's just using those two, it's never using the other two. I have never once seen that torch go on. It's always one of the 3, and it's rarely this one. So that's how that works. Also, if you give it a minute, all the other torches will turn back on. It's not a very effective random number generator, though. I guess you could hook it up in note blocks or something, I don't know. Not really sure what you can use it for, but it's worth mentioning. This is an ABBA switch. What happens is A goes up, then B goes up, and B goes down, and A goes down. So just like its name implies. This is a very commonly asked for type of machine on the forums and the wiki because it's useful for piston elevators. What happens is you turn this on, A, B, B, A. What's happening here is you basically got a clock, except for this repeater, which is switched to point towards A. After 4 ticks, A goes on. After 8 ticks, B goes on. When you turn it off, this goes off immediately, but this is already powering it, so it doesn't matter. So after 8 ticks, B goes down, and after 12 ticks, A goes down. You probably modify it to make it pretty close, like right now it's just 1 tick, 2 ticks, and then 2 ticks, and then 3 ticks. Like, it's kind of hard to see there. You probably modify it to a point where you can't really tell the difference if there is a difference when it's going down versus going up. And you can also string this across. You get down, 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 and then up, 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 up. That would work very well for a piston elevator, although I've never seen someone actually do it that successfully before. So the next thing on the list is the up vertical transmission. The way this works is you have an inverter, and another inverter. And this one can go up infinitely as opposed to this one, which I'll explain later. It has a limit to how many blocks you can go up. Basically what happens is when you flip the switch, this inverts that inverts that, etc. And it takes 3 ticks because each inversion costs 1 tick. So that's why I can actually look up and still catch it. This, as you can imagine, this can cause serious problems if you get a really high tower. It'll cause like 5 seconds of delay at some point. This is instant up vertical transmission. It's not as efficient space-wise as this, and you do have to put repeaters every once in a while, so it's not instant if you after you get to a certain height. I'm not entirely sure why, but it seems delayed when I'm turning it off. Anyway, the way this works is you have glowstone, which doesn't conduct current, and it doesn't block like glass doesn't. When you put it here, it doesn't block this area here. So I assume what's happening is this redstone is going up here, and this redstone's going up here, and etc., which is why it takes its time. It's basically like stretching a redstone string out in the distance, and it dies out after a while, which you can see if I do this. Really bright, pretty dull. After a certain height, it dies out entirely. So it's basically like making a staircase shape all the way up to here, but you're only using a 1x2 space. They did take that out at some point a while back, but then they decided to put it back in. I believe it was in the 1.8 beta range of updates. This next one is the down vertical transmission. It's basically summarized by these two blocks here and the redstone components. The way this works is redstone comes out from over there, turns this torch off, turns this redstone off, turns this redstone torch on, etc., etc. It causes just as much delay as that one, except it's in a 2x1 space. Unfortunately, there is no down instant vertical transmission. The next one here is a relay. It's basically you're deciding with this switch whether you want to power that piston or that piston. If I push this switch, this is the on-off switch. I turn that piston or that piston on or off. This one selects which piston you're using. So the way this works is this inverter and this repeater cause a 1 tick delay. The inverter switches the signal so I can just use a single switch instead of two. And it turns this torch off. And when I push this lever, that torch turns off. This section of redstone turns off. And this turns on. It's basically two AND gates sandwiched together. So if this is on, then either of these could be on, but because this isn't being powered, this torch is still on. So when I switch this, it switches this light off and this torch on. So that's how the relay works. These last two items are example of band memory properties. If you saw my piston video, then you'll know exactly what band memory is, but I'm just going to show it off in this video because some people are too lazy to watch both. Basically, this is the principle of band memory. It doesn't go through glass, it does go through a solid block, any solid block except for obsidian and bedrock, which don't move by pistons. Well, it still goes through them, it's just not very useful for band memory. Now this represents a 0 and this represents a 1 if you're using binary. So this is an 8-bit memory band because there are 8 blocks here and each one represents a bit, a 1 or a 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. And if a glass block is placed where this glass block is, this torch powers this repeater, which powers this block, or not if it's glass, and the repeater sucks the signal back out, and it either powers or unpowers that piston. This is just a clock hooked up to the pistons. Notice that when there's a glass block here, then it's off, and if there's a grass block here, then it's on. You also might want to notice that... the hell are you doing, pig? You also might want to notice that this piston and that piston fire simultaneously, and that piston fire simultaneously. I switched the delays around a bit so I could actually make the wiring work. But that's just basically how it works. So that's band memory. If you want to see more of band memory, watch the last 5 minutes or so of my piston logic gate, or just piston logic tutorial in one of my other videos. So that's about it for logic gates, and I will see you guys later. I'm not entirely sure what the next episode of this little mini-series will be, but I will get back to you on that. Until then, please feel free to comment, subscribe, or like. I do appreciate a bit of criticism, though. in the comments section, but please don't be a troll. So this has been Zayn26, and I will see you guys later. Bye.